Happy birthday, Grandpa. I made this blueprint design for you. This is a Spitfire from the war, and I made this blueprint design myself. Took me about 12 minutes. I'm going to show you exactly how I made it, step by step. This is going to be a fun one. The first thing I'd recommend is finding a high quality scan of the image that you'd like to do for a blueprint. So here I'm on a website called drawingdatabase.com, and these are primarily blueprints for 3D modeling, but we could certainly use one of these for our art project. There's a number of different drop-down lists here. There's vehicles, cars, buses, motorcycle, truck, military, and trains. There's also aircraft like fighters, spacecraft, bombers, gliders. There's watercraft, and then there's also weapons. So if you wanted to do like a pistol or a machine gun, that sort of thing. I've picked one out here from the list, and I'm going to use the Supermarine Spitfire blueprint. So this is the white and black print that I'm going to use. There's a couple here. And then I like how they have related posts down at the bottom. And then they have this thing I call like a breadcrumb trail down at the bottom as well. So you can find out exactly where you are inside of the drawing database. There's just thousands and thousands of these. So this is the design I'm going to use as my base. I'm not just going to copy the design and throw it on a print, but I'm going to use this material, this digital material, as a baseline to create my own blueprint art print. All right, so I've saved my photo or my drawing here of the Spitfire, and you'll notice it has a white background, and that's because I saved it as a JPEG file. That was really the only option. So what I need to do now is remove the white background, and I'm going to do that with a free program you can get online called Inkscape. So this is the website. It's just inkscape.org. This is a completely free to use vector software. The idea here is you can get professional vector graphic software. You can just download it, and you can also click on this explore features to find out what it's capable of. I'm going to be using Inkscape to just simply trace my picture and remove the white background. I'm just going to make a PNG file out of it instead of a JPEG file. So when you download and you open Inkscape, you're going to get basically just a blank palette that looks like this. There's menus along the left-hand side, and if you hover over them, it does tell you what each of the menu items are. And then up top as well, there's a menu path, and then there's an actual menu at the very top. So all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to open the JPEG of the Spitfire. So here's my JPEG file. I'll just double click it, and it will then open up into Inkscape. Okay, so now I've got my JPEG file. There it is. Now I'm just going to use Inkscape for one feature for this tutorial, and all I'm going to do is trace this image and only pull the black off of this JPEG. So I'm actually just going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Document Properties, and I'm just going to make the background transparent just so you can see what I'm dealing with here. So see how the background is transparent, but this is a white picture. I need to remove the white on it. So I've got this now selected. I'm going to go to Path and then Trace Bitmap. And when I do that, I'm going to get this little menu over here. Now because I have the object selected and I've got live preview now turned on, I can see what's going to happen. So I've got a brightness cutoff, and I can change the threshold to make it darker or lighter. If I change it right down to 0, you'll notice it's completely white. And if I increase it all the way up to 100 or 1, it will go completely black. It'll have like infinite darkness. So what I want to do is change it. Usually about 50 is the default. I'm going to try 60 just to see what happens. And then I want smooth, stack scans, and here's the key. I want remove background. I'm actually going to remove smooth. Smooth kind of like blurs some of the lines, and I don't want that. I want this to be as accurate as possible. So I'm just going to have stack scans. There's only one scan, but if you were to do colors, for example, you could have multiple scans. This doesn't matter. And then I want to remove background. So when I click OK, it's now going to make a copy of it. And I've got that copy, it just gets automatically selected. So I'm just going to drag it. And you can see now that's my actual vector. So here's my underlying photograph, and here's the actual vector. When I click this little button on the left-hand side, it says Edit Paths by Node. Because I have, well, first I'll click the white one, and I'll click Edit Paths by Node. There's nothing there because it's not an actual vector file. But if I click the new one that we just traced, and I click Edit Paths by Node, look at all the nodes that make up that picture. So this is the actual picture that we're going to use. So I can just remove the white one. I just deleted it. I'm going to click on this, and now I'm going to close out that menu. And now I'm just going to export this selection to a PNG file. So over on the right-hand side, there's a ton of menus. It's probably my one complaint about Inkscape is there's just so many features, which I know sounds like a horrible thing to complain about with a free piece of software, but it's like there's so much. So I only know a tiny bit on how to use Inkscape. What I use it for now over on the right-hand side is I'm going to export this document. So it's the little out arrow key. There's a couple here. Import a bitmap. This one is export. So I'm going to click the export button, and it's going to say, okay, do you want to export the page, the drawing? I want to export the selection, which is what I've selected. It's going to give me the image size, width and height, and the pixels. I can change it to 300 dpi. I'm going to change this to 300 dpi. And then I'm going to click the export button, and that's going to export it. Now I can also change the path here, and I can change what it's going to be called as well. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to name this Spitfire, and I'm going to say clear just so I know that this is the clear image, even though it's saved as a PNG. It's just personal preference. And then I'll click the export button on the bottom right-hand side. And that's it. Now my image is exported. And I can see that in my files that I have on my computer. Here's the original, that's a JPEG file. And then here's the clear one, bigger dimensions, and it's a PNG file. It looks white because it's a preview, but it says PNG file, and it gives me new dimensions when I hover over them. So I'm good. I can now close out of Inkscape. Okay, so I'm in Photoshop now, and I'm going to create my template for my blueprint design. So I'm just going to go File and then New. And look, I'm using an old version of Photoshop, but it's all the same whether you're using a new version or an old version. I'm just going to create my picture here, 11 by 17, and I'm going to set it to 300 pixels per inch. So this is just going to be able to get printed onto 11 by 17 piece of paper or a piece of cardstock. So here is my actual template that I'm going to use. Okay, now I'm going to import my PNG file. Okay, so I don't want to import my JPEG file because that'll give me a white background. Actually, I'm going to do that just to show you. That's my white background. That's not the one I want because now I've got the white background. Now you could remove the white background. You don't need Inkscape for this. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. But instead, I'm going to place my clear file instead. And that gives me just the black. And then I can zoom in on it if I want, and I can see this is what I want to do. Now I can create my document here. I could add a layer. And I could make the layer any color I want. I'm just going to use, ironically, white just so that I can see what I'm working with because I find this transparent background, this checkerboard, is a bit tough to read. So I'm just going to make my palette white, and then I'm just going to use the little paintbrush and just paint that layer white, just so I can see what I'm dealing with here. So you can see this is the Spitfire. There's the side view, the front view, and the top view. Now I'm going to show you the exact same way to get to this, but without using Inkscape. The reason I like Inkscape is because it's a very clean program if you're using like if you want a really clean image. And what I mean by that is it's not frayed or it won't pixelate, but I'm going to show you the other option, and either one will work. It totally depends on the size of the photo that you're dealing with. So if you just wanted to import your file, and I'm going to import the JPEG in this case, notice the dimensions are a lot smaller. They're 774 by 120. The one that I ran through Inkscape is 3000 by almost 4500. So it's a much, much larger file. But let's pretend that this image that I'm just going to import is sufficient for what we want. And it actually looks like it might be. There's a couple ways you can remove the white in Photoshop. It's really easy to do. One easy way is just to use the little eraser button over on the left in the menu, and you use the magic eraser tool. And when you do use the magic eraser tool, when you click on it, it's going to ask you to rasterize the image, which is fine. And then when you click on it, it will remove the white. Now, the problem with this method is you're going to have to go in and click a whole bunch, because every time there's like a black delineation inside of the file, it's only going to remove up to the other black. So if you've got like a circle, so inside of the plane, or something where it's closed out, you're going to have to spend a lot of time doing this. So I don't really like this method, but if you had a really clean design, like if it was just a very simple picture of a happy face and you could click like 3 times and remove all the white, you're good. So I'm going to just try this one more time, but what I'll do is I'll show you a different method to remove the white. All right, so I've imported a redo here. I've got the same JPEG file and it's got the white background. What you can do instead to remove the white is just simply click on the actual layer, not the thumbnail, not the name, but over on the right. And you may have to expand the layer out in order to do it, but you want to click on like some white space over here, and that will open up the actual layer. And inside the layer, there's this little black white slider bar, and there's another one under here. And what you want to do is look at this layer slider bar, and you can simply remove the white. So as I move this over, it actually removes and makes the image progressively lighter. And if I move it all the way to the left, almost the entire image disappears. Conversely, I could use the black as well, and I could make the image darker, or sorry, lighter. It moves it to white, and it would remove all the black. So what you do is you're removing the white, or you're removing the black. So it's just one option. I'm just going to move this from 255. I'm just going to move this to 254. Like it's literally one little tiny nudge to the left, and that will remove a bunch of the white. Now, will it be perfect? That's the other problem. So I'm just going to make a background here that's a bit dark, and I'm going to throw it underneath it. And you can see in some cases with this lower quality JPEG, this didn't work so great. So what I would need to do is either monkey with the design, remove as much of the white as possible. So I could, for example, go to there. That could work. And again, it's all personal preference, but that would be an option. And then you would just make your layer maybe a bit lighter. So maybe you just have like a bit of a lighter color, and that might work. Again, it depends on the quality of your image. Now, when I zoom in, it looks pretty good, but if I zoom into like 100%, you can see how it looks a bit pixelated. So you may not want that. So just be aware when you're dealing with large images that are going to go on your wall, you may want to spend a bit of extra time to use Inkscape, because Inkscape is free. And I'll just throw in Inkscape here, my Inkscape as a example. Even though it's not perfect, it's a lot smoother and cleaner design, and it doesn't look pixelated. So that's an option as well. So I'm going to go with my Inkscape trace, And I'm going to make this now into a blueprint design. And it's pretty easy to do. The hard part's already been done. All I'm going to do is on my layer, that is my Inkscape trace, I'm just going to right click and rasterize the layer. And what that does is changes it into a true picture, kind of freezes it as an actual photo. And then I'm just going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and I'm going to invert that layer. Now I'm only inverting the black and I'm turning it into white. That's it. So now I've got a white picture instead of a black picture. From there, I'm going to change the background to be more of a blueprint color. And if you're not sure what the blueprint color is, you can just find a picture of a blueprint online and just literally steal that color number. So I just went on to Google and I typed in blueprint art and it gives me back a bunch of results. And I'm just going to pick the color that I like the best. So let's pretend I really like this color. And I'm in no way ripping off the design. I'm just literally going to right click and save this image only so that I can take the color from it. So now I'm just going to open that picture. And then I'm just going to click on the little eyedropper tool, which is pretty standard. It's been in Photoshop forever. And when I click on the eyedropper tool, and then I just click on anywhere, whatever color I want it to be, it will change right there. And that's the color that I want. And then I'm done with this picture. So I'm not using it for any other reason. So now on my blueprint design, I'm just going to add a layer and fill it with that color. Easy. Next up, I'm going to change the text. I don't like this Spitfire stuff down here, so I'm just going to take the eraser tool and I'm just going to erase it. Just make sure you're on the right layer. I'm going to erase this. And then I'm just going to add the word Spitfire somewhere on here. So I'm just going to use the text tool and I'm going to type in the word Spitfire. Now it's actually creating the text in the same color. So I'm just going to go up to the top and change it to white text. And I'm going to pick for my actual font. I'm just going to go through my ridiculously large font options here. And I will just make it Futura Medium. I really like that font. So that's the font that I'm going to use. And then I'm just going to put it down at the bottom. Now you may notice it's covering the bottom, and that's okay because I'm going to change this. I'm going to move this up a bit and I'm going to make this a bit smaller and I'm just going to put it right there. So now I've got my Spitfire image, the word Spitfire. I'm going to highlight both of these. I'm going to highlight the underlying layer, which is blue. So I've got 3 of them. And to highlight these layers, I'm just clicking the Control key. So it's Control, 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 click. And then I'm going to go right to the top and I'm just going to align all these so they're in the middle. So there's a couple different ways you can align, but that's the easiest one. I just select the underlying layer and then I just click this little align button right in the middle. Now you could be done at this point. You could just say that's how I want it to look. But if you wanted to put a background on it, I'll walk through a couple different options. The first one is to put some sort of a grid on the background, and it's pretty easy to do. I just went online. I went to wallpaperaccess.com, and you can just Google like grid. If you Google blue paper wallpaper, you're not going to get like very much because it's usually got pictures on the blue paper. But if you type in grid wallpaper, you're going to get back stuff like this. So I'm going to use this one here. This is just a white grid. Okay, so I've downloaded the grid wallpaper and now I'm just going to place it into my file. File, place, inside of my file here, I've got the wallpaper. I'm just going to click on that. And then I can just make it either stretch it if I want, or I can just hold down the shift key and I can just make it larger without changing any of the underlying, like, 'cause if you stretch it, right, it's going to change, that's not square anymore. So you just want to keep the proportions the same. So that looks good. Now to remove the white, or sorry, to remove the color and keep the white only, you're going to click the channel and then you're going to remove, in this case, the dark, and you're going to keep the white. So it's kind of the opposite of what we did before. So I'm going to make it quite thin. There we go. So I moved this black slider all the way over. See, if I leave it, it's going to keep the orange on there. So I'm just going to remove the black, and as I slowly get over to, see, if I did it all the way, it would almost all be gone. So I just want just a tiny bit of white. So I'm just going to do that, and I'll click OK. So there's my grid. Now, I don't want the grid to be so like in your face. I want it to be subtle. And so to do that, I'm just going to change the opacity of the layer, and I can just change it right down to like 19%, for example, or 15%. So I can make it much less than it was before. So that's pretty easy to do as well. So I'm just kind of giving it some character in the background rather than have it be like all about the grid. So that's one option. You download a grid wallpaper or some sort of grid background, and then you just kind of plop it in there, and then you just remove whatever the color is. Hopefully you would just get a white grid, and you could always do a better search than I just did. You could search for white grid, transparent background. You could even create this grid in Photoshop in theory. You could, you know, draw a bunch of lines, you know, if you really want to make a high quality. And if you're going to make a lot of these prints, then you may just want to make your own grid and then just save it as a PNG file. And then you've got yourself a template to use. There's other options for backgrounds as well. I'll show you another option. So I just went online and I just looked up textured backgrounds HD, and I found a concrete one, I found a metal circular one, and then I found a weathered metal one. So these are just some options. You could pick wood, you could have vintage paper. There's all sorts of different backgrounds that you can use. These are just a couple examples. So now it just really comes down to playing around with what sort of background you would like. So I'm just going to place the concrete one, for example, in here. And just make sure it's covered up. So it has totally covered, which is great. And then all you would do in this case is just remove it, or move it rather, down underneath the blue layer. And then you can just change how the blue layer interacts. So here there's a normal, you can do dissolve, you can do multiply. And when I do multiply now, it changes it. And it kind of is like a see-through layer, like almost like sunglasses. You could also flip this. You could put the concrete layer above the regular layer. And then you could make the concrete layer darken, for example. That sort of gives it like a weathered look. Like maybe it's like an old vintagey piece of blueprint. And again, it has nothing to do with it being concrete. Like you're not saying this is a concrete design. You're just using that as fodder as you're creating this through different layers. So that's an option. So concrete's one. The other one I'll throw on there just to compare them is the circular metal one. There's all sorts of things you can do in Photoshop. This is the neat thing. I can spend hours just playing around on this. So that kind of looks cool just as is, right? You might just want to keep it like that. But if you wanted to have the blue layer shining through, then you would just change this to multiply. You would have the metal circular, and now the metal circular has sort of a neat effect. So I would just encourage you to just look through the different layer styles and just see what pops up. This one's darken. That one's called multiply. That one's color burn. Linear burn. I really like that one. Lighten. Screen. Color dodge. Linear dodge. Overlay is pretty nice too. There's soft light, hard light, Vivid light, that one's neat. And again, it all depends on what you're trying to make, right? So if I was doing like, say, a black light poster or some sort of neon design, then I've used vivid light quite a bit in the past. I love the way it looks, but not for this one. Then there's linear light, and then pin light, hard mix, which I'm not a huge fan of. Difference, that's pretty neat. It's absolutely not what I was intending. And then there's exclusion as well, and then hue. So, oh, and then saturation. So there's a few different designs here. So I'm just going to go right up to the top, and I'm just going to go back to multiply, and we're just going to pretend like that's the one that we want to use. So again, I'm not saying there's any right or wrong way to do it. It's just those are options. Let's try one more. That's the metal circular one. Let's go in here and see the weathered metal design. So this is like a piece of metal that's got like weathering around the edges. This is a very popular type of look for blueprint or for vintagey looking designs. And again, I'll just flip this to multiply, and we can see that's pretty standard stuff, right? It looks like a vintage blue. And again, it all comes down to what sort of style you want to have. You could also just put piece of paper on, like a weathered piece of paper behind it, and just call it a day. So there's a number of different options. This is really next level stuff, is the background. If you don't do that, if you just leave it like this, nothing wrong with it. Okay. So I'd say like most basic would be this design. Intermediate would be putting the actual grid on it. So like that. That takes a bit of time. And then if you really want to make your art print pop and have people kind of like stop in their tracks and go, whoa, then you'd want to have something like that, because that really moves it to the next level and makes it really hard to duplicate if you're selling these prints, or if you're, uploading it onto a website or that sort of thing. This really moves it into the realm of more art, because this is now completely an amalgam of our original print that we downloaded and inverted, our own font. It's got our own background that we, lifted off of the internet, and we've got the multiply filter on here with a color that we selected ourselves. So there's 3, 4, 5 different things at play here. And when you combine it all together, you've made an original piece that would be very hard for somebody else to duplicate. So I hope you found that helpful. I absolutely love doing these, long form walkthroughs with Photoshop. If you found this helpful, please do hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I would absolutely love to hear from you in the comments. If you have a question, maybe you have a suggestion, I would love to hear that too. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.